again by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Lilia able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal.
Perry in the face, 1-1. Score! On the board! Paul Kariya!
All right, we are back almost a month from the date of our last show. Yeah, we're a little behind, but it's to be expected right now in the current situation with everything going on, especially since the Ducks aren't really doing a whole lot. But they've been getting into the news. But before we get into the show, obviously Pat is not here, Jason is not here again, so Stephen is joining the show again. He's bailing us out again and coming on the show. Thanks for coming on, Stephen.
Happy to help, man. Just, had fun last time. Glad to come back.
Well, everybody loved it last time, and we got a lot more kind of interesting news to go over this time. And I guess we'll start with the big one. The Patrick Laine rumors have kind of been around for a while, I think, since kind of the offseason really started for the Winnipeg Jets, and they started heating up again. And David Pagnotta put out an article kind of just outlining free agency as a whole, and Patrick Laine's name came up in that article, and of course there was about, I think, 7 teams that were linked with it, and he passively mentioned that the Ducks were one of those teams interested in Patrick Laine. For me, it feels like deja vu from the Teemu Solani trade. Like, we're gonna go out and trade for the best Finnish sniper in the league again, and hopefully fleece the Winnipeg Jets for a second time.
Yeah, I think what's funny too is, so much of the conversation around Winnipeg for, I don't know, I guess technically it's like the last 6 months or something, but it's just been about how bad their defense is. So the idea of trading a defenseman again and probably a pick or two for a Finnish sniper in Winnipeg is just, like you said, it's just hilarious deja vu. I think we've heard, to his credit, we've heard Bob Murray say for the last couple of years that one of the things the Ducks lack is high-end finishing skill. And I think, this is as good a way as any to go for it. Like, Laine might have the best shot in the league. It's probably between him and, like, Austin Matthews.
Yeah.
So, I get why he's looking into it. I think I would be nervous about what the cost was.
That's the thing, right? Like, I don't think I remember a time where, like, 2 high-profile young players have been supposedly on the market. I know the Eichel news has kind of cooled down a little bit, but you wrote an article on it about how the Ducks should be exploring a Jack Eichel trade, and apparently the Rangers got as far as the Sabres putting an offer on the table for them. Apparently it was first overall, Zibanejad, Shesterkin, Keandre Miller, and a first next year. So it was just an astronomical offer. It was basically the Sabres knew that, Jeff Gorton was going to say no to that, and they just threw it on the table and said this is what it would take. But it got to that point where, his name was being asked about, and now obviously Patrick Laine kind of joins that discussion. It's an interesting spot to be in, obviously with the way things are going in this interesting season this year. But the fact that, like, 2 big young names are on the board, and Patrick Laine doesn't play for a Buffalo Sabres team. He plays for a team that was in competition, that's been a competitive team for the last couple of years. So it's an interesting spot for the Jets to kind of be in, to be shopping him.
Yeah, I think, well, the other thing is it's not just Patrick Laine, right? It's Nikolai Ehlers' name is in there too. And so I think what that tells you is that they know that they have significant forward depth. And, I joked about it when it happened, but, like, Lucas Visa signed a contract to join the AHL, and he had to clear waivers, and before he cleared waivers, Winnipeg claimed him. So, like, he thought he was going to go get to live the life living in San Diego, just playing AHL hockey and having a good time, and then all of a sudden he gets picked up, and now he's, like, the 3rd or 4th defenseman in Winnipeg. Like, they were just in such a bad way last year that the idea that they would... The Laine one makes more sense to me because his contract's shorter and there's so much uncertainty around him, and there's been conversations about him, and if he's not scoring, what good is he other than that? and he can be a little streaky. So like that would make sense. The Ehlers one doesn't because they just signed him to a great contract. He's only making like $6 million a year, and I don't know why, especially with they've got Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, and I think it's Kyle Connor.
Yep.
They've got good players. So like I understand the need to go out and get a defenseman, but I think they're kind of tipping their hand a little bit. Like if I was them, I would almost rather put their pick in play. I think they pick at like 10.
Yeah, it would make sense. I mean, like I understand trading from a position of strength. The Ducks did that with pretty much all their young defensemen when they had them. But it's a smart move by the Jets to at least explore it. Obviously, they didn't expect to lose Dustin Byfuglien and then obviously losing Jacob Trouba, and now it's really Josh Morrissey trying to do everything by himself. So there is a need there for the Jets, and I can understand why they'd be exploring that, But like you said, like the number 10 pick would have to be enticing enough for you to at least go out and get a top 4 defenseman. Like there are teams out there that I'm sure would be interested in that, and one of the reasons why the Laine situation is just interesting is because I think it's going to cost a lot for any team to go out and get him. Like this is former 2nd overall pick, arguably one of the best young goal scorers in the league. Like when we're looking at packages for Jack Eichel, I don't think it would be necessarily as much as that, what the Sabres are asking for from the Rangers, but it's got to be around that in terms of, a high first-round pick, a good young top 4 defenseman, another good prospect, and maybe another pick, 1st or 2nd round from the upcoming 2021 draft. Like you would have to think that's where the discussion starts for a player like Patrick Laine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the other thing I think, for me is, one of the reasons that like I wrote that article was because, Frank Saravalli said that Buffalo was working on an internal cap, and, they were only going to be spending about $70 million. And, so I don't know how, especially when I think they're spending $19 million between Jack Eichel and Jeff Skinner. Like, I don't know how much else how you're supposed to put a team together on that limited amount of cash, like, because we just know it costs a lot of money now. The thing about Winnipeg is they have $14 million in cap space, so they don't have to give up a player. They can, like you said, like we said, they can just use that 10 pick and see what it gets them. Like that'll definitely get them somebody. There's a lot of teams who are looking to move guys out. I mean, you got to think Carolina's in on it. I think we've heard that they're in on it. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I think they've got like a couple of defensemen in Carolina they could definitely go after. I don't know that they would be able to get, say, Dougie Hamilton, but he's UFA next summer, so yeah, he would at least be available.
Yeah, I think if you're Winnipeg, it's maybe not so much that you're shopping Patrick Laine as you're saying like, hey, like, Nick Ehlers could be a 25-30 goal scorer. Kyle Connor is a 30-plus goal scorer. Mark Scheifele can pot 30-plus goals. Blake Wheeler probably could if he focused a bit more on scoring than being the number 1 facilitator on that team. Like they've got a lot of guys who can put the puck in the back of the net. And if you're sitting there and looking at Patrick Laine and saying, what does this guy provide other than goals? That's why I think if he's on a different team that is desperate for goal scoring, I don't think this is a conversation we're having. But the fact that Winnipeg is so stacked with talented forwards in that top 6, it becomes a discussion where you can move a player like Patrick Laine, and it really isn't because he hasn't been good or hasn't fulfilled the potential or has attitude problems. It really is the fact that the Jets are just built so well up top that you can kind of explore moving a player like that. Whereas, if he was on a team like Carolina or on Anaheim, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. Patrick Laine wouldn't even be a guy you would consider moving at any point.
Right. Well, the other thing is, the one thing I will say is that, there have been reports over, I think, like the last year and a half that he's kind of pretty pissed that he doesn't just get to play with Mark Scheifele exclusively. Like, Mark Scheifele is an incredible passer. And, for a guy who's just a pure trigger man, like, I get why you're just like, you don't feel like you're being used to the best of your abilities if they're not putting you with, maybe the best passer on the team. So, it's a weird situation, but like you said, like there are a bunch of teams where if Patrick Laine is on the team, it's not even close to a conversation as far as, somebody calling to get him. He's only 22 years old. that's the other thing. Like, he's young, and he's already hit, he's got 138 goals in 305 games, like, and he's only 22. Like, the sky is the limit, especially as we've seen over the last, half decade or so, that the scoring is going up. Like, it may not be, it's not going to be the 80s overnight, but like, we're seeing guys' numbers start to rebound and get to a place that they were before the dead puck era. Guys are starting to get back to hitting 100 points. There's a few guys a year now hitting 100 points. So having someone like Patrick Laine, who again, he's 6'5", and he's 22 years old, and he's got maybe the best shot in the draft. Like, I don't understand how he's available. We've seen Alex Ovechkin make a career just standing on the faceoff dot and taking one-timers. Like, the ability to score is so valuable that the fact that he's even available speaks to, like you said, their depth up front and how just dire it is for them on the back end. Like, Connor Hellebuck stood in his head, and they still didn't have enough scoring to make it, very far. Like, they weren't a great team, like wins and losses by this year. So I don't know. I think if somebody Godfather offers him, they're going to give him up, because they know if he gets just nothing but chances, like, he's going to get to 50 goals again, and he's going to be in for a huge payday. Like, he's not going to be less than $8 million.
No, yeah, he's definitely going to be in for kind of bag when that contract comes up for him. And obviously, the Jets have to look to the long-term future. Yeah, they have $14 million in cap space now, but once they start filling these holes on defense and kind of looking to fill the roster, it's going to evaporate pretty quickly once you start adding these guys in there. But for me, I think the interesting part of this whole thing is if Winnipeg doesn't move number 10 or get an offer that they feel comfortable with in moving on from that, I think they'll look and see who's available there. And if Jake Sanderson's available at 10 for Winnipeg, I think that's a dream come true for them to bring in a defenseman of his quality. I doubt he slips down there, but having, right there, you've kind of fulfilled that need you're looking to maybe trade a guy like Patrick Laine or Nick Ehlers for. You bring in a guy like Jake Sanderson, maybe, he can't step into the lineup right away, but you've got a couple years before, you get him in the lineup and you've added that, solidified top 4, potential top 2 pairing defenseman. Or if a guy like Alexander Holtz is available at 10 and you're Winnipeg and you just can't pass up on potentially the best player available at that spot, does that then give you, the license to go out and trade a player like Patrick Laine if you feel like Alexander Holtz can come into your team and do exactly what Patrick Laine was giving you, potentially with more benefit on other areas of the game, on the defensive side of the game, playmaking, whatever you want to have it there. I think for me, that will kind of paint the picture of what Winnipeg's going to do when it comes to trading Laine or looking to trade somebody else.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think looking at, what they do with the 10 pick is a great point, because they are going to have a lot of options, and they are going to be able to see, what's available. I mean, again, teams are going to maybe want to trade up. They can, use that to replace Patrick Laine and then go out and get the best deal they can for Patrick Laine. I think one of the things that we kind of see every time, and I don't think it's often that players of this caliber get mentioned, but like when they do, like, and even lesser players, like every GM wants to win every trade. Like the only time, the only time you ever see like hockey trades is when it's like Yuri Sakach, and it's just like, I mean, he's fine, but he's not great. And we think, we can get somebody else to do basically what he's doing. You know what I mean? Or like Devin Shore for Sonny Milano. Like, they never make trades that make so much sense for both sides. Like, the number of times you get a Ryan Johansson for Seth Jones trade is so small. And there are teams out there that need goal scorers that have, players available. Like Matthias Ekholm, like, he's about to be a free agent soon. He's not making very much money. Like, Nashville Predators have huge issues as far as, actually scoring the amount of goals that they need to score to really be consistent. Like, it's kind of a joke that, like, every time they get one of their elite players, they turn into a middle six center. Like, it's just, Kyle Turris went there and died. Like, Ryan Johansson's been fine, and Matt Duchene has been fine, but neither of them have had the kind of impact that the team and David Poyle were hoping they would have. So, I think Patrick Laine should be available because I don't think anybody shouldn't be, but I think he won't get traded unless it's an offer that Kevin Cheveldayoff feels he absolutely wins. And there aren't a lot of GMs who are going to be fine losing a trade to get a 22-year-old that only scores.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see that. I mean, we'll wrap this up with kind of this question here. If you're the Ducks or, as a Ducks fan, if you had to give up, to say 6 overall pick or Hampus Lindholm or, Trevor Zegras, any one of those 3 assets, are any one of those, are you comfortable giving that up? Like if you had to give up 6 overall to get Laine, or if you had to give Hampus Lindholm to get Laine, or if you had to give Trevor Zegras to get Patrick Laine, which one of those, if any, are you comfortable giving over to Winnipeg?
I mean, just based on timeline, I think of those 3, you have to consider Hampus Lindholm to be the most reasonable choice. I'm not crazy about trading Hampus Lindholm. I love Hampus Lindholm. I think, he's going to be a very good and very effective defenseman in the league for a long time. There's nothing about his game that requires him there's nothing about his game that should deteriorate as he gets older. He should continue. He's a wonderful skater. He plays sound positionally. He's not jumping into the rush. He doesn't throw a ton of huge hits or anything like that. There's nothing about his game that won't hold up for 10 years. So I think having a guy like him on the roster is hugely important. The problem with that is that's apparently Cam Fowler with that contract he's on and that 14 trade list. So, I don't want to give up 6 and I don't want to give up Zegras, who's, the best prospect we've had in a long time. And if you're trading for a guy like Laine, I don't know that you want to give up the best facilitator that you have, So I think Hampus Lindholm has to be the guy, but I would be willing to give up just about anybody else. At that point, the truly untouchable list on Anaheim is so small just because they're so far away from legitimately contending, that I think everybody should pretty much be on the table.
Yeah, I think the untouchable list almost starts and ends at Trevor Zegras. I think you could make an argument that Hampus Lindholm could be included on there, but I don't think he's necessarily untouchable because if you're, we've speculated Laine and Eichel trades. If you're going out and getting a player of that quality up front, I don't necessarily think that means Hampus Lindholm is untouchable. Now, not saying the Ducks should explore trading him. I think he's a huge piece of their current team and the future as well, but I really think the only untouchable piece right now could be Trevor Zegras and then maybe John Gibson as well. I think you have to kind of throw him in there. But he's kind of in the same boat a bit as Hampus Lindholm is how long – it depends on how long you think this is going to take for the Ducks to get back to being competitive. You don't want to waste the best years of John Gibson's career and then you get to a point where, you are a good team, you are competing again, and it's just not the same player that you had during those times that you weren't so good. So it really is potentially a 1, 2, 3 person list on that untouchable list for the Ducks. Pretty much everybody in the chat is here to talk about the draft and where the Ducks are who they're gonna draft, what's gonna happen. We'll start on kind of the trade side of that because Elliot Friedman put out his 31 Thoughts article. I think it was a couple days now, where one of the points was just a simple sentence on the Ducks, and it said that the Anaheim Ducks were not averse to trading down from 6 overall. There was no explanation. There was no other information on there. It was just simply one sentence that kind of threw Ducks Twitter and Ducks fans kind of for a loop there. Eric Stevens put out an article where he kind of mocked up 5 different trades that the Ducks could move the number 6 pick for. We're going to quickly go through some of these and get your thoughts on these and see if this is something you'd move the 6 overall pick. Ironically enough, the first one involves Patrick Laine, and it was the number 6 pick, Josh Manson, and a 2021 first to Winnipeg for Patrick Laine. Just Patrick Laine, nothing else.
Yeah, man, that one hurts. I don't I would be fine giving up the 2021 round first. The the 2021 first rounder, I would be fine giving up Josh Manson as much as I absolutely adore that man. I would try very hard not to give up the 6th pick, but it's not a guarantee that even at 6, and even with how good, the top half of this draft is, that you're going to get someone who has the kind of potential that Patrick Laine has. So I think you have to very seriously consider that trade, especially because Lindholm's not in it.
Yeah.
Zegras isn't in it. So you at least have 2 players that you are hoping to make an impact sooner than later. Well, I mean, just Zegras making an impact sooner than later. Hampus Lindholm's he's good now. So, and again, like Patrick Laine is 22 years old. So he would be, his prime puts him only a couple years ahead of Trevor Zegras. So it's, I don't know. I would hate to give up the 6th pick to do it, but I think you have to really strongly consider it unless somebody falls into your lap at 6. But that's not a trade you're making when you're on the board, because Winnipeg is going to want, I know in the NBA you see this a lot where teams will pick for the team they're trading with.
Yeah.
But I don't think that happens as often in the NHL.
Yeah, I don't remember a time when that's happened in the NHL. And honestly, for me, the kind of wrench in this whole trade is the 2021 first rounder, because yes, the Ducks are a better team up front with Patrick Laine, there's no question, but you take Josh Manson out of that blue line and you don't have any additions there, and free agency, 1, isn't looking too great for the crop of defensemen who are available, and 2, you're not going to attract the big fish, a guy like Alex Pietrangelo or something like that, to come out and play for this Ducks team as they're currently kind of put together at this point. So that 2021 first rounder could be anything. It likely is another top 10 pick, could be potentially a top 5 pick depending on how bad the Ducks are next year. That's kind of the scary point for me. And of course, I don't want to trade the 6th overall pick, because I've watched a lot of these guys. You kind of start falling in love with some of the prospects at the top half of this draft, but you forget that Patrick Laine is such an exceptional talent and was taken 2nd overall in his own right in that draft as well, and it still is a quality player at the NHL level. But that just the uncertainty of what that 2021 first rounder could be just makes me nauseous of it being a 1st or 2nd or 3rd overall pick next year, and you're missing out on potentially drafting one of the top defensemen that are available at the top half of next year's draft. Like, it's forward heavy to say the least in this year's top 10. Arguably the 9 of the top 10 prospects are forwards, but next year it basically flips where 7 of the top 10 next year are defensemen. If you're the Ducks and you don't take Drysdale this year, and if you move and you pass on that 6th overall pick, that was your best shot at going out and getting a headlining defenseman for your future.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't actually thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense, because when you're trading a future first rounder, that's obviously pre-lottery. And, unless the Ducks make the playoffs next year, which I don't think is entirely out of the question, just given that, let me say this. If you trade for a player like Patrick Laine, who is an impact player, there is a world in which, he scores power play goals, takes some of the pressure off some of the other players on the team, and they kind of rebound having someone else. Maybe he revitalizes Getzlaf. I think Aaron Stevens mentioned that in his article. There's a world where in a Pacific Division that's not great, they could sneak into the playoffs, and so then maybe it's not so bad. You're looking at, 16, 17, 18, you know what I mean? Like that late teens pick.
Yeah.
But the idea of trading it for him and giving up, one of your better defensemen, especially if it is Hampus Lindholm, and then losing the pick that you could then use to replace him, that does hurt a little bit. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, Garrett brings up a good point in the chat here too that I didn't even think about, is potentially just making that 2021 pick lottery protected. And then, you do run the risk of kind of what the San Jose Sharks did, where they don't have that 5th overall pick this year. Actually, I think their pick ended up being the 3rd overall pick.
Yeah.
That, you run that risk of being better than you thought or being worse than you thought you were going to be, and that unprotected pick ends up coming to bite you later down the road. But if you're the Ducks, I think that's the only way you get this done, is you make sure that at least that 2021 pick is lottery protected, so that if you did finish outside the playoffs, won the lottery, whatever it is, you have the choice to either, just like Ottawa did, to either keep that pick in 2021 or just forego a 2022 unprotected pick to the Winnipeg Jets. I think that's the only way you get it done, because there's no way the Ducks can think that they're going to be for sure competitive next year and make the playoffs. There's no way you can look at the roster that they have constructed this year and what potentially could be the roster next year and say, Trevor Zegras is going to be the difference to take us to a playoff spot, or Trevor Zegras plus Patrick Laine minus Josh Manson is enough to make a push for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think that's really where the Silverberg and the Fowler and the Henrique extensions kind of hurt you. If those guys were on either shorter deals or, not quite as much money, you could move one of those guys to start replacing that pick. So maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable about moving on from a 2021 first pick, or you could put one of them in this trade and try to use that to make up for taking a first rounder out of it. But nobody wants Henrique at almost $6 million for 4 more years. I just don't. There's nothing about that deal that's going to be attractive to a team who's trying to contend, especially since he's already 30. Cam Fowler maybe, but Cam Fowler has the 14 trade list. If he doesn't want to go anywhere, he's pretty much not going to go anywhere. I would imagine that his 14 trade list is 4 teams with no cap room, just because then completely is in control. I don't think he's putting Ottawa on his 14 trade list. So I just think, we talked about this last time. Bob Murray's kind of fighting himself at every turn, and he's kind of backed himself into a corner where he can't necessarily make some of the moves that would support moves he may want to make now.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. Eric Stevens goes on and lists 5 different trades here. There's only one other one I really want to cover. The other 3, where there's one with Toronto that involved the 6th overall pick and Josh Manson, plus for William Nylander and the Leafs 15th overall. There was a one to Carolina. That was our 6th for Carolina's 13th and Jake Bean. And then another one, which was our 6th to Florida for their number 12, a 2023rd, and Owen Tippett. But the one I want to get to is the one we chatted about in the Hockey Writers Slack chat the other day, and where we're kind of going on about a little bit, was the one with the Minnesota Wild, where it was the number 6 pick, our 2nd round pick in this year, so number 36, and either Eric Goodbranson or Josh Manson, as Eric Stephen puts it here, for Matt Dumba and the Wild's number 9 pick.
Yeah, I got to be honest. If that trade's on the table, I almost make it every time. I don't. I think the player you're going to get at 9 is really good, and I think having a player like Matt Dumba who can create goals from you from the back end. I think he's scored double-digit goals almost every year of his career so far. The Ducks just don't have anybody like that. Having a guy that can legitimately be a goal threat, from the back end would be huge. And he's only 26 years old, so you're not getting older. You're getting a little bit more expensive, and maybe that 36 pick you can get someone who can be an impact player, based on what your scouts say and things like that. But as much as I love Josh Manson, if I could, I would make it with Eric Goodbranson, and I would give up another pick to make it Eric Goodbranson. But even if it's 6, 36, and Josh Manson, I think I'd take that trade every time.
Yeah, I'm not adverse to going from 6 to 9, because I think there is a clear top 9 in this draft. I know a lot of people think there's a top 12, and there can be an argument made there. But I think when you look at a clear top 3 of Lafreniere, Byfield, and Stützle, and then you've got another 6 here of Rossi, Raymond, Holtz, Drysdale, Perfetti, you're not really missing out too much, and especially if you're the Ducks, and from what we've heard from Martin Madden, and we'll get to some comments in a little bit here, is that they kind of value some of these guys the same in that 4 to 12 range, where there's not too much difference in terms of what they perceive as a talent level. So if you're going back from 6 to 9, I don't hate that, and then really if the sweetener to move from a Josh Manson to a Matt Dumba is 36 overall, I'll take that. I know every year when we move into the draft, you start valuing that early second round pick a lot more, especially in a deep draft like this. And you look at it, 3 years down the road, and it's a Jacob Larson or an Antoine Morand, and these guys haven't made the NHL yet. So it's tough to look at it now. When I look at it now, I value that second round pick a lot higher than I probably will, depending on who that player will be down the road. So if that's the cost it takes to upgrade from Josh Manson to Matt Dunbar, especially if it was Eric Goodbranson, I think you kind of walk away with that as quick as you can get off the phone with the Wild with Bill Guerin, right? So I would take that 100% if it was Eric Goodbranson. Maybe a little bit of an argument if it's Josh Manson, but I still think that's a win for the Ducks. And you're not falling outside the top 10. I mean, you're drafted at the same spot you drafted last year, and look what happened last year.
Right, and that's the thing. As much as there seems to be from the public lists, right, this consensus of a top 3 and then a top 9 to a top 12 thereafter. Like, I think there's always a chance that somebody galaxy brains and takes someone. I don't want to call Steve Yzerman, idiot or anything like that. He's clearly done a great job. Like, nobody had Moritz Seider at 4, and he took him because that was his guy. And there's always a chance that can happen. So then that creates a domino effect, and now you've got other guys falling, and maybe the guy that you wanted at 6 is somehow still available there at 9. So now you traded back, you upgraded your defense, and you're going to get the same guy you wanted anyways. So I just don't think. 36 is, I think your point about overvaluing the second round picks is true. I think the reason, everybody says, oh, it's almost as good as a first. It's like, yeah, but almost. The trick there is using that perceived value to make a trade. I think an early second is almost more valuable as an unknown asset than it is as a tangible pick. John Gibson, I think, I think John Gibson, was an early second from one of those trades. So, like, I get that you can get good players there, and, Braden Point was taken in the 3rd round and all that kind of stuff. But, like, there's a reason that first-round picks are the ones that people want the most. So if you can give up 36 and get an impact player who's still, like I said, only 26 years old, like, I think you have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, for every John Gibson and Braden Point, there's an Antoine Morand, like I mentioned, and not to hate on Antoine Morand, it's just taken high second, taken before Maxime Comtois, and I don't think that I think the Ducks should be first to say things haven't panned out as what they expected for Antoine Morand. So that pick at the time, it was the Ducks' first pick in that draft. They didn't have a first round pick in that draft. They valued that pretty highly, and I think the value of that pick was as high it was ever going to get before they took Antoine Morand with that pick. And of course, if they had taken somebody else, if they had taken let's just say Braden Point, I know he didn't go in that draft, but if they had taken Braden Point, of course you hit a home run at that spot. But that's the risk you run with outside the first round, and every round goes by, there's a less chance you're going to draft an impactful NHL player. So at that point, if that's the price to kind of upgrade and add a younger, kind of better fit to your blue line in Matt Dunbar, I think you have to take it. Last thing I want to kind of tie off here is just about trading the 6th overall pick in general, and it starts with a quote from Martin Madden that was in a recent article that Eric Stevens interviewed him in. They were just kind of talking about if the Ducks were tied to keeping that 6th overall pick, or if they were open to trading to it. And Madden had this to say. He's they're not that much tied to it, to be honest, and it depends who's still there. That top 12 is attractive from start to finish. If we think we can maximize it by moving up or moving down, we will. I don't think we're married to 6 at all, which kind of gives you an insight into what they're looking at. And Martin Madden is usually pretty candid about, not necessarily the names of the players they're looking at, but the range of kind of talent. He did that last year with, I think he said it was a top 12 last year as well in terms of talent level, and Trevor Zegras fell to them there. I think, up until the moment they make that selection, I think they're going to be open to at least listening to discussions on the 6th overall pick. And, a lot of it depends who goes where. And, I'm sure last year they were listening to discussions on 9 until Detroit took Seider at 4, and the Ducks thought that a player like Trevor Zegras could fall to them. So, I'm not averse to trading number 6. It just depends on the return. Like, I don't want to drop outside the top 10.
Yeah, we were kind of talking about this a little bit before, we went live here, and I think it's entirely dependent on the return. I can't, like, there's no world in which dropping outside of maybe 12 or 13 is really worth it. Like I made a joke earlier about, the idea of trading down to 14 and then taking Braden Schneider. Like, that's stupid. That's a terrible idea. But trading down to 10 and taking Anton Lundell, like, I don't think that's a bad trade. Or a guy like Jack Quinn, who maybe isn't as much, he's not as much of a pure goal scorer as, say, Alexander Holtz, but, like, he's still proven that he can score goals, and you pick up extra value. Maybe you pick up another second, or you pick up, a prospect that maybe you're higher on than that organization is, or something like that. Like, I'm generally, I like the idea of trading down. I think the idea of maximizing and compounding value is good. I think the tricky part here is that you have the 6th pick in a 12-man draft, and that's where it gets dicey. If you're not 100% sure you're still going to get almost a better player than who's being taken, it's hard to justify, especially since we know management doesn't want to be in this range for very long. So maybe next year, we're expecting it to be another top 10 pick, but the year after that, they might think that they're a playoff team. And if that's the case, then you have to plan accordingly with the idea of being in that, 20s. And so, I don't know, I'm kind of repeating myself, but I do think it's entirely about the return. And if you can maximize that return, then I think you have to really look at it. But you have to be really sure, especially in this draft, that you're getting legitimate value.
Yeah, and I'd have to think like any trade that would be executed involving the 6th overall pick is probably made on Tuesday, on draft day. I think you probably have the framework worked out of maybe a couple trades, and it all depends on who goes where. Like, I think if, Detroit or anybody or Ottawa kind of swings for the fences and goes off the board, and let's say a player like Jake Sanderson or Askarov goes in the top 5, if you're the Ducks at that point, and maybe you didn't value those guys as high, and you're looking at, Holtz, Horacio, Lundell, and the fact that now they're going to fall even further because some of these guys moved up the board, I think that's possibly when you pull the trigger on moving that 6th overall pick and kind of going out and maybe dropping down to whatever it is, 8, 9, 10, and taking advantage of a team below you like New Jersey or Buffalo or, Minnesota or Winnipeg that is really high on whoever it is. Let's say, Lucas Raymond is not your guy at 6, although he probably should be for Anaheim. But if he's not your guy at 6 and, you see him falling and he's New Jersey's guy or he's Buffalo's guy, and, they're going to give you their pick and one of their second round picks to move up, one spot or 2 spots. If you're Anaheim, you probably you hop on board and you take that, especially if he's not your guy, right? We don't know what Martin Madden and his scouting staff's draft board looks like, who's where, who they value higher than other guys. But I think that is, if we do see that pick get moved, I would have to think it's executed, almost right before they make that pick.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's that's made when you're on the clock. You mentioned Buffalo. I think it'd be really interesting if, and I don't know that they would do this, but if they said 8 and Henry Yokoharju for 6, like, I think you have to take that deal, because if it is an Askarov or a Sanderson or both theoretically that goes in that top 5, that pushes everybody back. So you've still got a chance at a Rossi or a Holtz or a Raymond or a Perfetti, or maybe even a Drysdale, depending on how it all plays out. Like, you've still got a chance at a guy that maybe you thought was a top 5 pick, and you're picking up something else in the process. So, but yeah, that's going to be made with them on the clock, and that's going to be one of those things, where we're going to be watching the timer, and it's going to hit 30 seconds, and then Bettman will say he's got a trade to announce or whatever. So, I do think you're right that I think there have been discussions, and there will be a lot of framework of deals that may or may not, be on the table for different teams. And I think Anaheim will certainly be in the middle of that somewhat, especially if they have made it so public that they're willing to trade down. But I don't think that'll happen before, at the very least, the 4th pick is made.
Yeah. You got to see who's going where and kind of assess your landscape at that point, and you don't want to pull the trigger too soon, and you miss out on your top 2 or top 3 guys at that spot. We all basically know that there's a top 3 in this draft, so really, again, just like last year, it starts at Detroit and what they do and who they take, and then for Anaheim, of course. Another wrench in it is the fact that Ottawa has 2 picks in the top 5, and they could do anything with that second pick. There's been rumors that they have been looking at pretty much every forward available. Jake Sanderson at 5, Yaroslav Askarov at 5. The fact that you have that second pick, you really can do whatever you want with it because you've already gotten one of presumably the top 3 players. Especially if you get Byfield at 3, you can go out and do whatever you want with that pick and take whoever you want. If it's a defenseman, a goaltender, another forward, a winger. Anaheim's in that weird spot where you've got a team that notoriously swings for the fences in Detroit, drafting at 4, and a team with a second first overall pick or a second top 5 pick drafting right in front of you. So it really comes down to the wire for them and waiting until after Ottawa picks and kind of assessing where you are and seeing what's on the table. So they're going to have a couple minutes to hopefully put together some trade if they're looking to go for it. But let's move into kind of the main point of the draft. Looking at who you would like the Ducks or who we'd like the Ducks to take at 6 overall. Plenty of names available. Obviously, we're going to exclude Byfield, Lafreniere, and Stützle because I think it's probably a 99% chance that they are the top 3 for this year's draft. But from there, we've mentioned a few of the names already: Cole Perfetti, Lucas Raymond, Alexander Holtz, Jamie Drysdale. Marco Rossi, Anton Lindell, Jake Sanderson. There is a significant crop of talent there. Like we mentioned, a top 9, a top 12 available. If you're picking for Anaheim at 6 and you have your pick of the lot from those 6 or 7 guys I mentioned right now, who's your kind of go-to guy?
Yeah, I really become a big Lucas Raymond fan. I think what he brings to the table as far as being I think the phrase being a complete player is kind of a little bit loaded because GMs suck and they use different phrases to kind of cover up certain things. But I do think he's the guy, he has a 200-foot game, as it were, but in the offensive end, he can do a little bit of everything. He's got a good shot. He makes good passes. He can read the game. He's not someone who's going to be forcing plays. He can take the shot that's given to him, or he can make a pass if you commit too hard. And I think, there's talk about him being able to run a power play unit. And Anaheim's power play sucks. It sucked for, 5-6 years now. I know they had the best power play in the league that one year, but I'm still convinced that was a math error. I watched that power play. It sucked. So I think having a guy like that with Trevor Zegras, we're now, because the other thing about Trevor Zegras is that apparently he's got a great shot and he just doesn't use it. So, as much as that's another Getzlaf issue, if you've got 2 guys who are just as lethal with the pass as they are with the shot, now you're really cooking. And, I think me and you have talked about this. And the thing for me is Lucas Raymond is a play driving forward to a degree that you can probably anchor separate lines with him and Zegras. And I think that's huge. I think Anaheim should not get itself stuck in a position where this year's 6 pick is dependent on last year's 9 pick to be effective. And that makes me nervous. So, Raymond is the guy for me, but Holtz is still great. And if they took Holtz in that shot, I'd have no problem with it.
Yeah, the thing about 6 is, if you have 3 or 4 guys, they're going to get one of those guys. Right. If for me, pretty much all year until recently, Alexander Holtz has kind of been my guy because I was married to the idea of having, the best playmaker in the league with potentially one of the best young shooters in the league. And, I think that's why a lot of Ducks fans have kind of gravitated to Alexander Holtz. But, you look at since the restart of the Swedish Hockey League, Lucas Raymond's been given more time. He, barely played over 10 minutes a night last year during his draft year. And now, he's playing top line minutes. He's playing first power play. And he's showing you that, he can do a lot of the things that people questioned that he could do. Could he put the puck in the back of net? Does he have, one of the top 5 releases and shots in this draft? Is he, a quality playmaker, a quality, line driver outside of the bottom 6? And, he's really pretty much checked all the boxes so far. So he's kind of moved into my spot that, if he somehow is available there, which I think there is a significant possibility. I think it's almost like last year where Trevor Zegras kind of fell into your lap at 9, that, if Lucas Raymond is there at 6, you take him and you run. And you consider it basically the same as last year with Zegras falling down to you. Like, he is the all-around complete player, and when you look at the way the game is played now and the fact that you need quality play-driving forwards, there's a chance that he is the third best player in this draft. And if he's there at 6, you got to take him. But other than that, if Alexander Holtz is there, there's an argument there, of course. The Ducks don't have any pure goal scorers, so bringing in a player like Alexander Holtz would be great for the organization. Marco Rossi is an excellent pick. He's getting a little bit more hype because of the exposure he gets in the OHL and the numbers that he put up, but he still is a great player. And then you look in the back end with Jamie Drysdale as well. He's probably my number 4 among those 3 players that I would take at number 6. I know a lot of mock drafts have the Ducks taking him at this point, and I get the need. Outside of Josh Manson, what's the Ducks' next right shot defenseman in the prospect pool? Hunter Drew? There really isn't. There really is. Yeah, there's just not. There's not a lot of depth there. So I understand it. I get it, but man, you can't. I don't think you can pass up on some of these forwards next year. A lot of people say you can't look at next year's draft and make your decisions based off that. But when you have so many quality defensemen that will go in either the top 10 or top 15 next year, I don't think you can ignore that. You have to kind of take that into consideration and look at your team realistically and saying, well, are we going to have another top 15 pick next year? Probably. If you think that Raymond and Holtz and Rossi are on the same level as Jamie Drysdale, that's where those organizational decisions come into play. And I think that's where you kind of have to lean forward and bring one of those guys in and prepare for next year to take a defenseman.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is, I think you have to look, I think you have to look at where Jamie Drysdale would fall if he was in next year's draft, right? If he's the 6th best defenseman in next year's draft, but in this one he's the first defenseman, well, then that kind of solves your question. You take the best forward you can get, and you accept that worst case scenario, you're getting somewhere in the Jamie Drysdale, range with the defenseman that you're going to get with what is likely going to be another top 10 pick. So, I don't know, like you said, how you can not look at next year. To me, that's just poor. That's poor planning. That's poor organizational awareness for, planning for the next 6-7 years of what the Ducks franchise is going to look like, what the team on the ice is going to look like. I understand that they've been taking a lot of forwards lately, but the problem with that is a lot of those forwards have been in the latter half of the draft, and none of them have the top 6 upside, really, that, or even first line upside that these guys like Raymond and Holtz and even Rossi has. I've heard some concerns about Rossi's mix of size and not a great skater that makes him, I think, questionable. I do think he's the one of the 4 I'm the shakiest on, just because he doesn't seem to be a great skater. And if you're not a great skater, I think being listed at 5'9" is problematic. You can fight through checks and, have the will all you want, but if you can't get to your spot and when you're there you can't fight guys off, then I don't know how effective you can ultimately be. So I think I would take Drysdale ahead of Rossi. But if Rossi has, first line center upside, and now you've got 2 guys who can be first line centers, I think you got to swing for it. I don't think that's a bad pick. I think you have to look at next year and look at this year and look at the fact that as much as you do have forwards, you lack elite forward talent. And that needs to be a thing that you fix.
Yeah, and honestly, I've softened on the whole needing a right shot defenseman in this draft or immediately kind of outlook, because just look at Exhibit A, the team who just won the Stanley Cup. Look at arguably their top 3 defensemen are Victor Hedman, Mikhail Sergachev, Ryan McDonough. They're all left shot defensemen. And yes, they brought in Shattenkirk. I think they brought him in via trade, or maybe they signed him. I can't exactly remember. I know the Ducks were in on it, but I think it was
signed him. He was out. Yeah, the Rangers.
Right. Okay. So they brought him in. They signed him. Cernak is a good defenseman, but he's not an elite defenseman on that team. And then Zach Bogosian they brought in after he got, I think, bought out or his contract terminated from the Buffalo Sabres. Like, not to say that the Lightning are the gold standard and follow their blueprint to a T, but I don't necessarily think you need 3 left shot defensemen, 3 right shot defensemen anymore, and your number 1 and number 2 have to be a lefty and a righty. I don't necessarily think you have to go down that path anymore, and really shouldn't be kind of your selling point on taking Jamie Drysdale because he's a right shot defenseman and they're hard to come by in this league. Like, the Lightning proved that you can get 2 good right shot defensemen from non-traditional ways, from a buyout and signing him, and from picking up a guy near the trade deadline who nobody else wanted and turns into a valuable piece of your organization. It shouldn't be why you take a guy, and I guess the same kind of goes. My concerns for Marco Rossi as well is, how many 5'9" centers do we have in the NHL? And I don't like to pick on size anymore, because I think the NHL is moving in a direction where smaller guys can succeed in positions they're not normally used to. I mean, just look at defense right now with guys like Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar. But I can't see him being a number 1 kind of two-way center at 5'9". As big, as stocky, as thick as he is, as everybody's saying, he's 5'9", but he's 190. He's going to play at like 195. I get it. He's not a typical 5'9" forward, but I can't see this guy being down the middle because there's just really nobody to base it off of. There's no elite centers under really 5'10" in the NHL that you can look to and say this is his career trajectory. This is what he's going to kind of become, and maybe he's the trailblazer in that category. But I don't think I want to take a risk on Marco Rossi being the first and only 5'9" superstar center in the NHL.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, I think your point about the Lightning is a great point as far as getting the best defenseman you can have, and playing a guy on his offside isn't the worst thing in the world. But the reason they were able to do that is because they had 4 lines that were really good. You know what I mean? Like, they had incredibly high skill forwards that were able to play a style of hockey that made it much less of an imperative that you have guys who are perfectly able to cleanly take it off the boards. Like, you've just when you have the best players you can have, you can figure the rest of it out. You can design your system around the talent that you have, and what you need to do is get talent. So I think, like you said, like, taking a right-handed defenseman because he's a right-handed defenseman is flawed logic. I think if you need a right defenseman and you trade for a right defenseman, that's very different. But when you have 4 or 5 guys who all have really high upside, and you take maybe one of the guys in the back half just because of the way he holds his stick, I think you're setting yourself up to fail. And, like you said about Rossi, I think the 5'9" thing is a problem. Again, Braden Point's 5'10", and, with sports heights, like, I always just assume they're 1.5 to 2 inches shorter than whatever they're listed at. But Braden Point can skate. And if the biggest concern outside of his height is that Rossi's not a great skater, then I don't know how he's going to make up for that, right? Because big guys can make up for not being great skaters by using their body, and great skaters can make up for not being very big by using their speed and their quickness. If you don't have either of those things, I don't know how you're going to be effective at the next level. I don't know how you're going to get to your spots and how you're going to stay there. And that, is really what makes me the most nervous about Rossi, is he's deficient in 2 things. If he's just going to stand there and make passes and make shots, that's great. But, like, that's not the way it works. It's a fluid sport. It's not like he's some statue center in the NBA where you're just like, all right, just go sit on the block. We're going to throw you, passes in, and you're going to turn around and dunk it. Like, that's just not the way that it works. So I understand that people are very excited about Rossi and that he's got a lot of the, intangibles as far as, like, having a high motor and a high work ethic and things like that, and maybe you can improve his skating. But I would be nervous about taking him at 6 when I think there will be better players, or players with less serious concerns, at least. I I think you can see the way in which he fails. I don't know that short of it just not working out, you can see how Raymond or Holtz fail. Like these guys should be effective at the NHL level. Um, because there doesn't seem to be any obvious flaws in their game that you can look at and go, this is why they didn't make it. Rossi's got two things, and that's not great for a top 10 pick.
Yeah, and for me too, like I think Rossi probably moves to the wing at the NHL level, and that's likely where he's successful. But I just can't be convinced that, obviously Rossi was, a play driver on that team. It was an exceptional year. He was by far, the best player in the OHL. But you can't convince me that if you plugged in Cole Perfetti in that same position as Marco Rossi, that he wouldn't put up similar, if not better, numbers. Or if you put Lucas Raymond on that team and gave him the minutes and the opportunities that Rossi got with that Ottawa's 67 teams, and the list goes on. Alexander Holtz, if you plugged him in with where Jack Quinn was, is he going to score 70 goals in the OHL, right? Like, you can make these comparisons all day long, but I genuinely think, like, if you put Perfetti where Rossi was, I think he probably has the same type of year, and then Perfetti's the one that's getting kind of hyped up and talked about because he led the league in scoring. And this is the thing about prospects that end up just blowing everybody out of the water in terms of point production, whether it's in their draft year or not. The hype just gets blown out of proportion. And yes, Rossi is a top 10 talent by no question, but I think the question marks around him kind of get overlooked because of the season he put up. Like, let's not forget, I know it wasn't his draft year, but his draft plus 1 year for Sam Steele, he blew everybody out of the water. He put up like 130 plus points in the WHL, and everybody was talking about him. Ducks fans thought he was going to be a number one center in the NHL. That we had the best prospect, one of the top 10 prospects out of any team in the league, and then not saying things went south, just things came back down to earth for Sam Steele in terms of his projection and his potential. And I think Marco Rossi is a better player than Sam Steele was going into the draft, obviously by looking at where he's projected. But I think the hype of the production kind of, you start overlooking the downsides and the red flags that a smaller guy can't, isn't the best skater in the draft, or what are his long-term future at center. You start to kind of overlook some of those things because of the year he had on the team he was playing for.
Yeah, and I think if you find yourself in a position where Marco Rossi is available and he is having that kind of hype, maybe that's where you start looking at trading down, right? Maybe somebody wants to jump up from 8, 9, or 10 and take Marco Rossi, and you aren't as high on him and you think you can get value and trade back and pick up maybe one of Raymond or Holtz or Drysdale because they're still going to be there at that pick. I think that's the thing. But I do think you need to take a total picture of a prospect. It's not just about how good they were at 17. It's about how good are they going to be at 23 and 24. And if you think you can develop Rossi and work with him to make him an elite one center, and he's got all the other things that you can't fix, then that's fair. I'm open to that argument. But if it's just he had a phenomenal year in the OHL and you're just biting really hard on that bait, that's not great. And I think, Martin Madden's a smart guy. He seems to do a good job. Like, not every pick pans out. So I don't want to say that him, any of the Ducks' shortcomings in the last few years as far as players reaching their potential is necessarily on him inherently. But I think that it's worth trusting in those guys. And I think if Martin Madden says Marco Rossi's a number one center, then I'm willing to be open to it. But I would be apprehensive myself about making that pick.
Yeah. So let's assume, just for the sake of it, the Ducks take a forward at 6 overall. They've got two pretty enticing picks after that at 27 and 36. Do you feel inclined to take a defenseman if you're Anaheim after you've taken a forward at 6? Do you feel like with one of those picks you have to go out and get a defenseman, even if it's maybe not the best player available on your board?
No, I don't. I don't think you should ever feel that you have to take a player at any position. I don't think, unless it's a number one center or a number one defenseman, I don't think that you should just take them to fill a hole, right? Because every team can use a number one defenseman and every team can use a number one center. But you get those guys in the top 5. You don't get those guys, at 27 and 36. So at that point, I think you need to take the best player available. And, there are other ways to bring talent into your team. And if, at the end of the draft, you look around and you have a shortage of defensemen, then you go out and fix that. Sign undrafted free agents, go to the college teams or, plan ahead for the draft next year when it's all defensemen. I don't think you need to feel compelled to take a position just because you haven't yet. I think that's bad logic.
Yeah, I would hope they would take a defenseman if he was the best player available on the board. Now, there are going to be some good defensemen available kind of around that 27 to 36 range, but we've talked about a top 3, a top 12, and I think once you kind of get outside that top 20, like really from 20 to almost 45 this year, some of these guys could go anywhere in that range. A guy where, some teams think is a middle second round pick could squeak into the first round for some teams, just kind of based off the rankings that we've seen so far. Now looking at, I guess we'll start with number 27. Are there any guys that in looking at some of the prospects and some of the guys that could be available around that spot, are there a couple guys that you're looking at and you're saying, man, I hope that guy falls down and is available at that spot?
Yeah, I think for me that 27 spot's really interesting because, like you said, that 20 to 40 range, pretty much anything can happen, and guys can fall and guys cannot. I think Corey Pronman has Jeremy Poirier as his 27th or 29th ranked player, but in his full mock draft he goes 41 because of some of the concerns about his style of play. What he can do well is really great, but teams are going to be nervous about taking him because of some of the warts. So I think that's a perfect example of how things can get a little weird. So I think for me, and again, I'm kind of an old school hockey guy. If Braden Schneider's there, you take him. But Hendrik Lapierre, I think, is the other guy. I don't think he's going to fall that far. I don't think the concussion injury concerns are going to let him fall that far. I think teams are going to see that he's probably a top 10 talent, and they're going to take him in before he gets there. But I think he would be the first guy I would take if he was available. And after that, Poirier and Braden Schneider, I think, would be great. Braden Schneider is the type of defenseman Anaheim likes, and that's, good value, especially since there's rumors he could sneak into the top 20 and go somewhere between 15 and 20. There's a lot of talk about Toronto taking him at 15 just because they believe that physical right-handed shot defenseman. So those I think are the 3 guys for me.
As much as I'd love them to trade that pick and move into the top 20 with the second pick, I doubt it happens. But if they're staying at 27, I like that logic around Hendrik Lapierre. This guy was a consensus top 10 before he missed pretty much all of his draft year. He was a guy who people thought maybe could sneak into the top 5. And I think he could have fallen to 27 if the QMJHL season didn't start a couple weeks ago and they had some preseason games to watch him, because him and Dawson Mercer with Chicoutimi in the QMJHL have just been tearing up, preseason and the start of the season. I think his first game, Lapierre had 2 goals and 2 assists. And in preseason, he led the entire QMJHL in scoring. Teams are starting to see that, yeah, he has an injury history, but if he can stay healthy, and obviously it hasn't affected him this far, so as long as this guy stays healthy, he still is probably a top 15 talent in this draft. So, not good news for the Ducks because he could have fallen if they didn't have that extra playing time that, some prospects are benefiting from right now, especially the European prospects, but as well as guys like Jeremy Poirier and Hendrik Lapierre that are playing in the queue right now. But, he would probably be close to the top of my list for guys available. If we're looking at, potentially defensemen, I think a guy who the Ducks would be high on is William Wallinder. They love their Swedish defenseman. He's a big kid. left shot, but I don't think they're too worried about that. And he kind of fits the mold of the defenseman the Ducks look at with those late first-round picks when we look at guys they've drafted in the past. Another Swedish defenseman in Helge Grans, who is a right-shot defenseman, is a kind of a bit different from what the Ducks have been drafting in the past in terms of kind of a smaller offensive-minded defenseman. I think he's only like 5'9" or 5'10", but as we've seen, lately with smaller defensemen, it's kind of started to not become as much of an issue for teams taking them. Not sure if the Ducks are at that point yet where they feel comfortable maybe using that second first on a guy like that. It could be the second round pick, which is only 9 picks later, that they go out and take a guy like that. But they have so many options, which I think is such an intriguing point to look at for that number 27 pick, where there's goal scorers, there's playmaking centers, there's big physical defensemen, there's offensive minded defensemen who could be available at that spot, where depending on the ranking you look at, any one of those guys could be the best player available on the Ducks list.
Yeah. So I actually want to ask you a question. So let's say Toronto's on the clock and you call Dubas. Would you trade 27 and 36 for 15?
I think I would. I think it might depend on who's available there. But when you look at like potential names like you mentioned, Braden Schneider or Rodion Amirov or Dawson Mercer or Noel Gunler or Dylan Holloway, like they are just that much better than I think the crop of players you could get at 27, or at least just their potential ceiling is higher than
right.
And the warts and the red flags aren't as prevalent on some of those guys. So I think the player you're getting at that point, like I don't think the Ducks really need quantity at this point in time, especially in forward prospects. They really need quality prospects, players that are going to jump into their top 6 and be contributors, defensemen that are bona fide top 4 defensemen, and that's their floor. Those are the prospects the Ducks are looking for right now. Like, look in the system. You've got Max Jones, Troy Terry, Sam Steele, Benoit Olivier Groulx, just to name a few of the guys. Josh Maher. These are all going to be middle 6, potentially 4 or 5 defensemen on this team, but they need those quality prospects because outside Trevor Zegras, they don't have any. You're going to get one at 6, and I think any opportunity you have to move up in this draft specifically, you have to take it. And if it's, I think the most likely option for the Ducks to move up in this draft would be to trade with Toronto at 15, because I think that the Leafs are looking to kind of add some quantity into their system and kind of fill out those depth rows. They've already got the quality up front with Matthews and Tavares and Marner and Nylander. I think they're starting to kind of look to add to that prospect pool and have some of those prospects that the Ducks have in terms of middle 6 contributors and role players and good, how do I kind of word this? Like players that fit what they're looking for. I think the Leafs are a team right now that they might not really have to draft the best player available, but more so the player who fits the need that they're looking for. And it's why so many people think Braden Schneider could be an option for the Leafs at 15, because he's exactly what they need. And, you look at, potentially a kind of bigger grinder type forward is another kind of need for the Leafs. And maybe if they feel that they can get, both of those at 27 and 36, they pass up on having that 15th overall pick to kind of hit both needs in one draft rather than having to go and find that player another way. So I think if you're getting a phone call from Dubas on draft day and it's to move up to 15 for those 2 picks, I think you have to take it.
Okay, I'm going to run another one by you because I love this stuff. This stuff that really gets me. Would you trade Raquel and 36 for Carolina's 13?
Oh, man, that one's tough. I think for me, it depends who's there. Like I said that for the Leafs pick, but man, Raquel's just such an attractive piece because of the contract he has and the potential that you put him in the right situation, he can be a 30 goal scorer, 50 to 60 point guy. But honestly, if a guy like Amirov or Lindell, somebody like that kind of falls down to 13, and Carolina's calling you and saying, well, give us Raquel in 27 and we'll give you this pick. I think if you're the Ducks in the situation you're in now, I think you take that, because I think you can replace Raquel easier than I think a lot of people think. He's a great player, don't get me wrong, but I think he is highly replaceable in terms of talent and what he brings to the roster. It's just the contract that makes him so attractive and makes me kind of think the Ducks could get a bit more for him. But yeah, man, if a guy like Amirov or Lindell or something like that, or even a guy like, I doubt it, but Jake Sanderson or Yaroslav Askarov even falls to 13, I know the Ducks don't really need an elite goaltender in the pipeline, but you can't really pass on just the quality of prospect that you'd be getting at that point.
See, okay, so you said two things there that really keyed in on you. The first thing I want to ask is, would you do it for LaPierre? If Hendricks is there at 13, would you do 36, the second rounder, and Raquel to take LaPierre at 13, which maybe is a reach since he might fall in the teens, but knowing what his potential upside is, would you make that trade?
That one's so tough, because Hendricks LaPierre, I think talent alone is definitely a top 15 pick, potentially a top 10 pick, just based off his talent if he had played a full season. The only problem is he didn't play the full season because he was hurt, right? And this guy's clearly concussion prone. He's likely going to get one over the span of his NHL career. What's going to happen to him after that next concussion? What type of player is he going to be? Is he going to be able to rebound the same? How many good years are you going to get out of this guy? I think for me, I don't make that trade if it's him at that spot. And I kind of eat sand if he turns into what you expect him to be, but you kind of just associate the risk with that. And we didn't take him there because there's always a chance that he gets one more concussion, he's done. And we moved, one of our better young players and another pick to take him, and he didn't work out for us. I don't think at that point you can take the risk to move up to take him.
So here's my thing about that. Rickard Rakell is already 27, and if you're taking a pick at 6, I think it's worth it to take a big swing on a player with that kind of upside, right? Because the hope is, if you trade Rakell, you're hoping to trade him for a first at the deadline, which means he's going to a playoff team, which means he's back half. On top of that, you say, I'm trading, a future first or a late first and an early second to move up into the top 15. Like, that's the deal that you think about. And so I just, we talked about this last time. Like, I don't think Rakell does any good on a bad Ducks team. And I think if you can use him to take a swing on somebody that's falling for reasons that aren't talent, I think you have to take a long, hard look at it. The other thing is, I am fascinated by the idea of the Ducks trading up back into 15 and taking Askarov and knowing they have Gibson now. And right around the time that Gibson's going to start falling off, they'll be able to bring over Askarov on his ELC.
I would be fully on board with that. That reminds me of one thing, because we always talk about the fact that the Ducks never draft Russian players. I think Igor Bobkov in 2009 or something was the last Russian-born player that they drafted. And it's funny, in reading that interview with Martin Madden, Eric Stevens asked him that question, like, why don't you guys draft Russians? And of course, the always the issue with Russian players is we don't know when they're going to come over. That came up, but that always kind of amazed me with the Ducks. Is like, I talked about trading up and getting Rodi and Amirov, but would the Ducks even do that? Because yes, I think he's a talent that you should be trading up to get at that point, but the Ducks are just so averse to bringing in Russian players because of that risk factor. Like, Russian players are and as Martin Madden said, it's not that they don't like them. They take everything into account. They're usually ranked lower than maybe they should be on the Ducks board because of all those things together. So that would make me think that Amirov and Askarov potentially on the Ducks list are outside the top 15 just because they're accounting for those risk factors and are they going to come over, when they're going to come over, is it going to be 2-3 years down the line? Like, you look at the Rangers with Shesterkin, it panned out for them. He's going to be their goaltender of the future, but it took him like 5 years to get over here. And, the Islanders are still waiting on Ilya Sorokin, and, how long did it take Kuznetsov to come over for the Capitals? Like, Panarin coming over for the Blackhawks as well. Like, all these ones I'm talking about, they worked out in the end. Like, they're exceptional players, but it was just the wait that they had to wait for them to come over, right? Like, I don't think the Ducks take the risk on a Russian player there.
Yeah, I think you're right. But the wait to me is the part of it that's almost attractive, because I think having the opportunity to say, we have John Gibson now, but we're planning for the fact that eventually John Gibson is going to get older, and we maybe have the best goalie prospect in 10 years, 15 years. I think I heard maybe Cam Robinson said he's like the best goalie prospect since maybe Carey Price. It's like, oh, okay, that's not a bad thing to have in your system. And especially with, Lucas Dostal in your system too. Like, I just think it's a very interesting thing. I think 100% some of the weighting issues are real, and I don't think you can overlook that. And I do think if you are going to trade Raquel for a top 15 pick, you're probably safer taking someone who can make an impact in 2 or 3 years, right? Like a Lundell or a LaPierre or somebody like that. But I do think it's very interesting if he really is that quality of a goaltender potentially.
Yeah, because, Spencer Knight last year got kind of the same treatment, and this is the best goaltending prospect since Carey Price. Maybe not as kind of glowingly as Askarov has gotten that comparison, but those, that did come up, and those quotes did come up in that, Spencer Knight is going to be this good. And, now people are saying Askarov is that much better than Spencer Knight. And I think some team's going to take a swing on him. I honestly don't think Askarov falls outside the top 10. I think there's going to be a team in there, whether it's, New Jersey banking on the fact that they have 2 other picks in the top 20, or, Minnesota needing a goaltender desperately and having kind of good success with Russians in the past and bringing over Kirill Kaprizov, that maybe they go out and draft the Russian, or even if it's Nashville at 11, taking Askarov because Pecorine is basically done for them as well, and trying to get another goaltender for the future, and a guy who could hopefully step in a couple of years for them. There's a lot of destinations that could potentially go for Askarov, but I would love the Ducks to jump into the top 15. With both of those picks, I don't know how many teams are willing to kind of move down in that point. If you're Nashville, you don't really need quantity. You're looking to get that star power, and I think if you're Nashville, you're looking to get that number 1 center hopefully at that spot, whether that's Anton Lundell or whoever they take there. If you're Florida, are you really looking to kind of trade down from that spot when you can bring in a quality defenseman? Carolina, maybe I could see them potentially liking to have extra picks because of how well they draft, that they might be willing to take 27 or 36 for 13. I don't think the Oilers do it because they're looking for a goal scorer, and then it comes down to Toronto as the only other team who I really think and probably the best fit to take 15 for 27 and 36. I hope it happens on draft day. I really think the Ducks need to get another bona fide top 15 talent in this draft, but I don't know. I don't know if he can pull it off. Usually the Ducks are the ones trading away picks to get extra picks.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting about this draft, and I wrote about this at the Hockey Writers last month, is there are a few teams that fancy themselves being competitive now in that top 15. And I think taking 27 or 36 and strapping it to Rickard Rakell or Josh Manson, or if you can get someone dumb enough, take, I'd put both picks in Adam Henrique's pocket and send him out the door if I could to get another top 15 pick. I think that's the thing about it to me that is the most interesting, is that there are a couple of teams who maybe need more help now than they do in 3 years. You know, like I think Ricard Raquel next to Connor David is a great idea. I don't know that they would give up the 14th pick for it, but if they fall to 27, maybe they can, maybe they can do it because he is on that contract, like you said. He is young enough at 27 years old where he's still got a few good years in front of him. And I do think Connor McDavid and or Leon Draisaitl are so good. It would not surprise me if Ricard Raquel went off 1 year and was a 40 goal scorer. I mean, they turned James Neal into a power play genius. So I think that would be Anaheim's best bet into trading up, is moving on from one of their assets, one of their better win now players, to try to do that. I don't know that it'll happen because Bob Murray, I think, still thinks his team is closer to contending than it is. But I actually think that is maybe their best bet to get into the top 15.
Yeah, and honestly, that would be more enticing to me than moving both picks, because I would like the Ducks to keep a second-round pick at number 36 to kind of snag one of those, maybe take a reach on a player you think could kind of be better than that spot where you drafted them. The Ducks have started to kind of do that. Braden Tracy was a bit of a reach last year, where he's a bit of an enigma because he was his rookie season in the WHL, and a lot of analytics people liked him a lot, and he was still projected to go somewhere, in the late second round, and the Ducks took a swing on him and took him with their second first round pick. So they've kind of showed that they like to swing on those picks. So I wouldn't mind keeping 36 and then packaging a roster player like an Adam Henrique or Josh Manson or a Ricard Raquel with that number 27 to move into the top 15. And I think you can take advantage of a lot of teams who think outside of that top 12, it's really a mixed bag from 13 to 40. There are teams that have that thought process. Now, I tend to think that it is like a top 10, and then there's another 10 kind of in there, and then from 20 to 40, it's kind of where that mixed bag begins. So if you can get anywhere in that top 15 or 20, you're getting a better player than you would if you were to stay at 27, or at least a better shot at getting an impact player. So, I hope they explore it. We always hope every year going into the draft the Ducks are one of those teams that are going to move up or, use their assets to kind of better themselves in the rebuild. But we've been kind of disappointed so far. And, what stings the most is watching the Kings go out and just do everything right, rebuild sense. Arguably the number one prospect pool in the draft. And every guy who seems to be falling on draft day gets taken where the Kings are drafting. Last year was Arthur Kaliev, and I think there was a couple other guys who fell to the Kings. Akil Thomas, I think the year before, was another guy who fell to the first round, and the Kings drafted him at 44. So that's what stings a bit more to me, is just watching the Kings kind of do everything the right way in terms of rebuild, and watching Anaheim just kind of fight with whatever their identity is in terms of a rebuild or a retool.
Yeah, I genuinely hate Rob Blake for being as good at this as he is. Like, I really, it drives me crazy. He's proven to be, a smart and capable guy. I mean, you can take issue with the Drew Doughty signing. You can take issue with the Kovalchuk signing, but Drew Doughty's going to be a king lifer now, and he got him 2 cups, and he won a Norris. Like, I think Rob Blake of everybody understands that has value. Kovalchuk, he took a shot, and it didn't work, and you move on. But getting out from under Tyler Toffoli and Tanner Pearson, getting back Tyler Madden and getting back picks, like, I just don't think it can be undersold how good he is or how open he is to making moves and appreciating where his team actually is. And I think the Todd McClellan hiring was a great choice. That team doesn't have the talent to score goals right now and win games. But as far as the way they're playing, like, they're one of the better teams with the underlying numbers, and, the style that they play is sustainable. And I really hate Rob Blake right now. He was one of my players growing up because my dad's a huge Kings fan, so I got to watch him play a bunch. But, like, it's I really hate how good he is at this right now, especially with how deep that prospect pool is.
Yeah, they're looking good for the future right now. Obviously, we'll be all kind of tuning in on Tuesday at 7 p.m. to see who the Ducks take In terms of kind of broadcasting from our sense that day, potentially might be live for that. I know we were live last year for the Ducks to take Trevor Zegras, which was a lot of fun. This year I'm a little bit nervous being live and potentially taking Jamie Drysdale or Jake Sanderson and being disappointed. I already have flashbacks of being live during the the draft lottery, and that was a major disappointment watching the Kings jump up to number 2, so I'm already a bit worried about that. But we'll let you guys know. I guess draft's in 2 days, so we'll let you know as soon as we can in terms of plans if we're going to go live. That does it for the show today. We did have some other topics and some fan questions, but they weren't necessarily draft focused, so we will get into those on our next show, which should hopefully be on Thursday, kind of recapping which is hopefully a good draft for the Ducks. We'll look at some of those questions there. We'll look at who the Ducks picked. There's some news on David Backes that came out, I think, a couple weeks ago now in terms of his role with the team, and a few updates on Ducks loaning players out and some of the prospects and where they're going to start their season until Ducks training camp. But we'll get all to that hopefully on Thursday. And then we also have plans for a show this Sunday. So we're actually back, and we are actually live and doing more shows now with the season ramping up. Stephen, thanks for coming on. I know you'll be heavily focused on the draft on Tuesday and who the Ducks will take, and I'm sure we're all going to cry about it or cheer about it in the Slack chat for the Hockey Writers too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fun thing is once the Ducks are off the board at 6, I get to focus on Josh Bell losing his mind. Because someone is going to take Braden Schneider at 12, and I'm going to love it.
Yep. Oh, yeah. The mock drafts go out the window on Tuesday when Steve Yzerman steps up to the board and takes Hendrix Lapierre at 4 or something. So can only imagine how it's going to go that day. It's exciting nonetheless. We'll be covering it as much as we can on the podcast side. I know me and Steven will be covering a lot of it on the writing side for the Hockey Writers, so make sure you check it out there. And we'll see you all come Thursday.